He cannot see me, but I can see him, which is the reverse of the problem I had last time.
Can we get out of?
Hey, there we go.
That was so easy. Okay, and she'll probably have to help me disconnect later so you're not looking at me for the rest of the day or the rest of, quarantine.
Yes. Okay, excellent.
Okay.
So I'll just start. I've got a couple of, just to give you the background on how this was going to be run. We had the book club scheduled for happening at our library, and with the COVID-19, that's been put on hold. So we had copies of your book where kids were checking out. We're going to read it and then hold the book club to kind of discuss the book club for that. And then a little bit on me. I work part-time at the library. As you can kind of tell from the background, I'm the kind of STEM space science guy. So they had me doing these kind of book clubs when they kind of fall in that kind of quasi-STEM category for doing that. And so regularly at the library, I do a lot of the STEM Day science program kind of activities there. We were doing, I think the last one before we closed was we were making marshmallow shooters out of PVC pipe, kind of make a marshmallow blast. And so that was going to be kind of the context for our book club, was showcasing it for that. We had other books coming up like Lab Girl we were going to be doing for the adults. I was going to be heading up that one too. So I kind of do the kids and the adult kind of STEM related stuff for that. So
sounds like a fun job.
Well, yeah, and you'll probably catch me doing that because I loved your book, but I will probably be peppering in there some of the how I thought you did some neat devices for kind of working in the explanation of the mission, the timeline, how it worked. I thought that was a really neat device by her best friend, kind of, being the one that would explain it to her because he was the kind of more geeky one on that and had followed all the news programming and that. So you'll probably catch me doing some of that.
Well, I'm happy to answer any and all questions you have for as long as you want me.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. So to all of our library patrons, and we're going to be doing the book club, it's Mr. Chris. We are doing I Love You, Michael Collins. And forgive me if I get the name. I'm going to try to say this right. Lauren Baratz-Logsted?
It's Baratz-Logsted, so you're very close, and you made the same mistake everyone does.
Okay. And a lot of you that are going to be hearing this have already read the book. And so we're just going to recap a little bit. It's kind of showcasing the story of 10-year-old Mamie and her best friend Buster, and Campbell the cat. We can't forget Campbell. Is a big part of it as well. And I think we can get right into it because the kids have obviously read the book. And so I don't need to kind of summarize that. But I wanted to start with one of the points I thought was interesting was how well you set that 1969, the summer of the time period, just with the technology that was available. Because I think that's eye-opening to the kids a lot when I talk about, I was doing a lot of 50th anniversary of Apollo 11 programs. I think the kids are so used to, their internet access and their devices and the 24/7 nature of television and everything that you could only get the information on the 3 major networks and at certain times, or only what you could get in that day's newspaper. And that was it. And so I thought that was a really neat part of the book to kind of illustrate what life was like in summer 1969 for kids versus what life is like, in the year 2000 for kids, just on that front. So did you have to, having lived through those periods, did you have to do a lot of research into like the color TV and the black and white? I know that was part of a thing too.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm not going to say it's autobiographical. I was younger than Mamie at the time of Apollo 11. She's 10. I was 7 years old.
Yeah.
But things like that, you just remember. It's huge. And it is tough to explain to kids 50 years later just what a big deal Apollo 11 was.
Yeah.
The idea of the entire country paying attention to one thing. Because, of course, everything is so fragmented right now because you have so many choices. But, I counted out in my head one time from my memory from when I was 7. And, we had 7 stations, TV stations. That was it,
Yeah.
So, everybody focused on one thing. And, of course, the black and white and color TV was, color was sort of just coming in, or at least in terms of our house. But the funny thing about Apollo 11 is Mamie's family gets it, so they can watch this. And I was just reading the rock musician Roger Daltrey, the singer for The Who, his autobiography the other day. And he talks about how in 1969 in England, everyone came to his house because they have the big color TV set, 35 inches was huge for the time.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But the irony of it was, the moon and space is black and white. You've got this color TV. You're not really seeing anything color TV on it with Apollo 11. I mean, of course, with the liftoff you are.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of funny. So it was more the research into, refreshing my memory on what kind of products, like the toy, the rocket that Buster builds. I mean, we had erector sets in my house, these metal things that you bolted together. But that specific rocket, I found the advertisement for it online. And I, described it in the book. It was a real thing you could send away for. So some of the things like that I did research on, or the history of Michael Collins. I mean, I knew him for what he did, but it's not like I was born knowing things like that. He was born in Rome, or how hard it was initially for him to get accepted by NASA and to make it as far as he did, which is actually one of my favorite parts of him as a human being, is his resilience. And if you actually don't ask me questions about that at the end, hopefully there'll be a few times for me to talk about the things that matter to me most about him in the book.
Well, and we can get into that right now, because that was one of the parts I loved about the book, is that it's I love you, Michael Collins, and he's so front and center because Michael Collins is a huge hero of mine. I had the honor, I got to meet him last summer in Oshkosh, Wisconsin.
He was so jealous.
Well, he was presenting an Apollo anniversary program at the air show, and I got to meet him briefly there. And I just love that because of, again, all the focus on Neil Armstrong, and everyone knows Buzz Aldrin. But as you just point out, not everybody knows Michael Collins. And he's such an interesting, I've even got, because I love his book, which I'm sure you're familiar with, Carrying the Fire. That's one of my favorite astronaut biographies. So I was just thrilled at the get-go with your book, just on that was kind of a central thrust to it. And I loved her rationale that all the boys think Buzz Aldrin's the coolest, and all the girls wanted to marry Neil Armstrong, and that you just go with kind of Mamie's thrust to that it's a whole different thing for her, and that she didn't want to go along with the crowd, and she's kind of going her own way, and then her rationale for having that be the person she writes to. So I'd love to have you speak to that, because that was a big interest of the book for me.
Okay. The first thing I love about Michael Collins, of many, I'm just going to talk about like my top two today. But the first is that in his class of, 527 cadets, he graduated 185th. Okay. And every time I say that to a room full of children, at a school or a library or over Skype, I could see a teacher or a parent or a librarian, someone giving me the hairy eyeball. Like, what are you saying? Are you celebrating mediocrity? You're not supposed to strive to graduate the middle of your class. You're supposed to strive to be number one. Now, I have no idea how hard he worked in the West Point Academy. I have to feel he worked very, very hard. It's a highly competitive place. But when you picture astronauts and you picture the people being selected for the most important mission to date at that point in the history of the space program, you picture everyone chosen being number one, not 185th. And yet there he is. That's on his record. And the first time he applied to NASA for the program, he did not get accepted right away. They weren't automatically saying, oh, yes, go to the front. We want to lead with you.
Yeah.
No. And so I do think that kids, especially, too often in life, they hear from people, if you're not number one, if you don't get straight A's, if at a young age you are not, the greatest at whatever it is you want to do, it's already over for you. You're never going to get there. You're mediocre. Yep. And Michael Collins, it seems like all his life, he's been able to find a way to be happy with where he is, have a contentedness there while striving for those other things that he also wants. And he kept working hard until it was impossible for NASA to say no to him anymore. And once he was there, kept working hard until he was chosen for what I consider the most important mission. And even though the glory goes in history books to Armstrong and Collins, Aldrin for actually walking on the moon. To me, his is the most important job because he is the, I hope kids at home probably know what a designated driver is. It's the person you trust to get you there if for some reason you can't drive yourself. Well, he's the greatest designated driver in the history of the world. If
Agreed.
he does something wrong, if he has a heart attack up there or has a nervous breakdown or just makes a mistake, they die.
Yeah.
You have an entirely different story. So I love his work ethic, and that the lesson that you don't have to always be number one. You just have to be willing to work hard and go after your dreams, and don't let other people take it away from you.
Yeah.
And the other thing I like about him is the thing that I touched on before, the idea of knowing how to be a happy person. I think all too often in life, people think that happy is something that's going to come to you from outside. I'm going to be happy when I lose 10 pounds. I'm going to be happy when the boy or the girl I like likes me back. Or for a lot of us right now, I'm going to be happy when I can go out to the places that I could go out to a month or two ago and not think about other things. Michael Collins once famously said of Buzz Aldrin, I'm going to try to get this quote right because I think it's so important, that Buzz was always more bothered by the fact that he wasn't the first man to walk on the moon than he ever appreciated the fact that he was the second. Imagine, there's only one person that got to do something before you, and how many people, you could probably tell me better than I can, kids better than I can, how many people ever actually walked on the moon?
12.
12, right? 12, that's it, in all of human history. And it may happen again, or it may not. Imagine you're number 2, but you spent your life bitter because you were at number 1. Mm-hmm. And of course, here's Michael Collins, who a lot of people to this day do think should be bitter, because he got to be so close, but not actually get to do it. But the one person who was never bitter about that was Michael Collins. He has had an amazing life. And one thing that people who just know a limited amount of the story and think, oh, of course you'd be bitter not getting to do that, don't realize is that if he had been willing to stay at NASA for a few more years, he would have gotten a chance. He would have been, I believe, on what ended up being the last mission. He would have gotten to walk on the moon.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I didn't want to cut you off, but not a lot of people know that Deke Slayton, who was in charge of the astronaut office, personally offered him the command of Apollo 17.
That's right.
The last mission. But to your point about him being happy and happy with who he was thinking about what that would put his family through, all his career thus far.
Yes.
And he did not want to put his family through the separation and that. So he said, I did my thing. I did my mission. I'm content and happy with that. I'm glad I got to do it, but I don't think I want to put my family through that. So he could have walked on the moon and he could have said yes if he wanted to do that. But I think knowing who he was, he made the choice to say, I've got to think about my wife and kids now, and I'm not going to do that.
And I think there were also other things he wanted to do, and he had decided even before he went up that day, in July of 1969, whatever happens today, win, lose, or draw, we make it, we don't make it, we have to abort the mission, come back. I'm done after this because my family has already sacrificed so much. And there were other things he wanted to do. I think he wanted to fly more when he wanted to fly as opposed to just when NASA wants you to fly, right? And he wanted to teach. He wanted to write books. I think he actually, in my opinion, Carrying the Fire is the greatest book about the space program because it's an incredible history of what it takes and what the program did and it accomplished, but it's also an incredible story of an incredible human being. Mm-hmm. And it's a model of how to live your life and how to be happy with where you are. So those are the two things I've gone on and on, but I love those about Michael.
And that ties into, how did the book kind of genesis, did that come to be? Were you thinking about writing something about the Apollo program, or was it the kids' story first, or how did that kind of gel together for the event?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you know about me as a writer, and it's okay if you don't know a lot, but I've written about 40 books for adults, teens, and kids, and I'm kind of all over the place: historical, contemporary, drama, comedy, you name it, and which makes me kind of strange as a writer, to be all over the place like that. But my ideas just come from something in life will spark a memory of something, and all of a sudden there's a whole novel in my head about it. And in this case, it was something just reminded me of Apollo 11, and kids will ask, they'll say, well, so when you were, watching it, were you a fan of Michael Collins back then? I'm like, no, I was a Neil Armstrong girl. I mean, it's true. I was 7 years old, forgive me, but, 50 years ago, Neil Armstrong was considered to be a hottie,
Okay.
And he was in charge, you go for the power, right? But it was only through growing up myself and reading about things how I realized that, to me, Michael Collins is the best one. And just one day, I just had this idea of this girl, a little older than I was at the time, but going through this. And I just had this idea of her family, the rocket ship being a metaphor for her family. When it first takes off, there are all those things, the stages it fires, those things it needs to leave the Earth and get to where it wants to be. But of course, by the time it re-enters the Earth's atmosphere, it's just the capsule, right? It's just Columbia that's left. It's hopefully going to make it back. And that's kind of what Mamie's life becomes. Dad goes and mom goes. And so I just had this idea of this poor little girl that for one reason or another, everyone takes off. And everybody does think someone else is watching her at a certain point. And even the cat squad. And there she is, just no one stay with the ship anymore. And it's just like, it's her connection to Michael Collins. And of course, she's still got Buster, the best friend ever.
Yeah. Well, and I think I said that before. I really liked the device, I think, that you employed with Buster kind of being the one to brief Mamie on, because she's a little more confused on how the different segments of the mission work, or the danger. She keeps thinking maybe the danger's over now that the launch happened, but he keeps pointing out, no, there's like 300 other things that have to go correctly for this to work. So I kind of liked, because I know that's a lot to explain to the kids when I would just do a presentation on Apollo 11. It's so much information. There's so many different parts to it. They can get overwhelming. And I thought you did a really neat job of kind of putting the reader in the position that Mamie's in, of maybe they've heard of Neil Armstrong, or they know a little bit about, they heard in school as a historical figure, but it's a great way to walk people through that may not be familiar with how the mission worked and the different elements of the mission, and that he's kind of the best friend, kind of laying it out through building the model or doing pretend play, which I think is a great way to kind of drive those concepts home when they employ Campbell to be their third member of doing that. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, because I thought that was a really accessible way for kids to get into the mission and to kind of understand it, versus you just putting an excerpt from a newspaper article in there, whatnot. And I thought it personalized it, and the reader can kind of take the journey along with Mamie to kind of being more aware of the parameters of the mission.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the few things that my editor on that book and I disputed over a bit, because my initial explanations were more complicated than are in the final version. And I am by no means a science person. I'm not a rocket scientist, let's put it that way. I had to do research about all that stuff. And I did end up simplifying the language. But, at one point I had to say, this explanation needs to be here, and kids will care. They will be interested in how it works and how dangerous it was, because the complexity and the danger is, if there's no risk, there's no reward, right? If this was something that anyone could do, it's an entirely different story. I don't know if that makes sense, but and I credit kids, I credit all my readers of every age with being smart. And being curious about things. So,
yeah, because that's one I share with the kids that you touched on in the book that surprises a lot of them when I do a lot of third grade presentations, was that a lot of the astronauts reported the scariest part of the mission was the first 10 seconds to clear the launch tower, that nobody wanted to bump into a large skyscraper size, metal structure that's right alongside the rocket, and that had to be connected to the rocket until the last second.
Mhm.
And that a lot of them felt like they'd cleared one of the most major hurdles when they got that call, tower clear.
Right.
Mission control, because the chance I've had to interview some astronauts personally, they all said that almost to a T, that was the scariest part. Once they cleared that, there was a lot of daisy chain connections that had to keep happening, but they were more concerned about clearing the tower than just about anything. And a lot of kids are surprised by that, because they're like, wait a minute, you're just taking off and that's your biggest concern. It's not about landing on the moon or taking off from the moon or getting an orbit around the moon. It was here. So that led to a lot of great questions, because the kids are kind of all surprised by that fact.
Yeah, well, I think with all kinds of flight, they're the most dangerous parts, right? Takeoffs and landings, where everything is, has to go right.
Yeah. And did you, on Mamie's character, was she based on anyone you knew, or was that completely created just out of your research?
No, I mean, people do ask if she was based on me, and we have a couple of things in common. We have our interest in Apollo 11, but that was shared by pretty much almost every child in the country at the time. The other thing we have because my family was nothing like hers. I have one older brother.
Okay.
My parents, their professions just entirely different. My mom was one of the first, she was the first officer. She was a pharmacist. Do you mean like she was like high up in the Connecticut Pharmacy Commission? Do you mean like back in whatever? Do you mean like the 50s when, no women were doing something like that? So not like Mamie's mom stay at home. The one thing that we have in common that I think that kids are interested in is when Mamie describes herself as a cheat reader. I was a cheat reader too.
Okay.
My parents and my brother, they were just these speedy, brilliant readers, and they would do that thing like Mamie's family does, lie around the house, reading. And so I would too, but I would pretend, do you know what I mean? So that they'd think that I wasn't an idiot. And then, one day something on the page, like with her, caught my attention, and I just kept going, and I've been a lifelong reader. Since the age of 12, I've averaged 100 to 250 books a year. So it's definitely worth it to pay attention to the words.
Yes.
And not fake knowledge. But I understand her thing. Sometimes you can feel insecure around other people if, for whatever reason, they're not even trying to, but you feel stupid. You don't feel as quick as the other kids in school, but reading is important.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I was interested in just how times are a little bit different on, I think the mantra for the kids back then was, and for a lot of kids all across the country, was get outside, until dinner time.
Yes.
And don't come back. And I talked about this with my dad, who was saying, I talked to him after reading the book, and he was saying, my mom, because he played hockey a lot, and he was like, I don't come home until it gets dark.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just such a different thing, I think, for kids today, where everything's kind of programmed and managed. It's an after school lesson, and it's this sporting activity, and it's that. And it was just get out of the house and don't come back until it gets dark.
No matter the weather. No matter the weather. And in winter, when I was growing up in Connecticut at that age, we had real winters. It would start snowing in November, and you might still have some of that snow left over in March, because it would snow so frequently. Yeah. And, I was not an athletic kid at all. And, things never fit right or whatever. So, I might go outside, and within 10 minutes of getting outside, I might have snow shoved down my snow boot. I still might be out there with, for another 2 or 3 hours with blocks of ice for feet. And it was just expected. Kids, get outside, freeze, come back when you're done.
Yeah. And I think it's a much different experience for kids today, because they don't have that. It's very much helicopter kind of parents parachuting in, and everything's kind of programmed and planned, and all your activities. So I think that's a real difference for lifestyle for kids today, where they just don't have that.
Yes, and a lot of people, most households, both parents need to work. Whereas in 1969, it was far more common to just have one parent working outside the household. Like my mom, even though she had the pharmacy degree and had this, big deal job before she had kids, once she had kids, that was a 1 day a week job. So, there was someone home to say, get outside and do things. One thing I find that not so much kids, but adults object to the book, and there are people that are younger than I am because they don't have memories of those times, but the idea of her being home alone, people are like, oh, that would never happen. That would never happen. You'd call child services. Not in 1969, you wouldn't, and she's 10 years old. There were plenty of times when I was 10 years old and I was home alone, not for days at a time, but certainly for hours. You didn't have like daycare centers or these, things close by. And certainly in the case of her family, people do think her 16-year-old sister is home with her. It's a 16-year-old on her own that decides to leave to go to the boyfriend's. But, whether it's the parents or the oldest sister, they think someone's in the house. And so, people do sometimes, they impose, I don't know, our morality or our way of thinking on the past when it was different. So.
No, and in the way you structured the book, I think you totally see how it kind of fell that way, where everybody thinks the other one doing something, but because of how we're separated and the communication systems at the time, the one phone that's off the hook half the time in the book, and you can't call to get through to check, you could totally see how it that way in the story. I was going to talk about in the book club too, because it hit home for me, your kind of portrayal of the dad kind of being lost when he's thrust into the nighttime routine and breakfast and all that, and it's very obvious that it was the divisions of, the mom was taking care of everything at the home front and the dad was going off to work, and when he's thrust into having to do nighttime and breakfast, he's just like asking her, what do we do now and what's happening? And I was a stay-at-home dad for several years, and I was going to talk about that in the book club too, on how this shows the way things were for a certain family at a certain time, which at that time was probably very prevalent across the country, versus the way things are now, where there can just as often be a stay-at-home dad, as a stay-at-home mom, or a mixture of the two, because everybody's working and they're sharing, the duties on that. But that hit home for me when he's like clueless as how to do dinner, how to do wrapping up at night and do bedtime. And I was like, oh yeah, I was doing that 24/7 for my youngest. And then, so I was going to talk about that with the book club, have the kids kind of relay, like, what's the setup of your house and what do your parents do? Do they share it, or is it primarily your mom or your dad, or, how does that work? Because
in my house, my husband's a writer too, but he's also a window washer. And before I had my daughter, I was also a window washer, but she's 20 years old. So we all, we don't think of like, we've never been like men's work, women's work. It's kind of, whoever cooks is the person who has more time to cook and more inclination to cook, which the last few years has been not on the time part, but my husband, he's found it just relaxing, and that's fine by me. And I mean, in terms of my daughter, when she was born, I mean, certainly whenever he was home, it was never work for him. It was just like, I'm home and now I'm happy to do, walking, taking for walks around the neighborhood, doing bath time, all of that stuff. That's never been a tension for us in our relationship. Now, my parents, my mom, except when she was helping my dad out in the drugstore, which was the reason he could have a drugstore, because he was able to hang her degree on the wall because she was the pharmacist. But still, she did everything else. Do you know what I mean? I don't think she got a free diaper change, is what I'm saying. I mean, whereas it would never occur to my husband to object to changing diapers. It's not like, to him, it's not like, I'm not doing my wife a favor. I'm doing my job. It's my kid too. But that's not the way it was. But I'd be careful not to demonize Mamie's dad, because like, I feel like even though it's clear in the beginning of the book, he's not seeing his wife, he's not seeing what she wants or what she needs, or that she's grown frustrated in this societal role that she's been cast in at a very young age, having kids, and just being at home and being a homemaker. But he's a victim of his times too. He's expected to live his life a certain way. And maybe he doesn't love it all the time. Maybe he doesn't love his job, but he doesn't question it,
Yeah. No, I just thought it was interesting for that kind of, again, snapshot of 1969, that was the way a lot of families were kind of running that classical the male's the breadwinner and doing this, and the wife was taking care of the home front and preparing the meals and caring for the house and the kids, and so that was I thought a good discussion part for the book club on just how our households are today versus the kind of stereotype, it's kind of depicted in the book for 1969, and kind of comparing that. Well, that was my list. I didn't know if you had some things you want to talk about that I didn't cover.
Let's see. Well, I don't want to go on too long because I don't want to bore your audience. But so I guess I'll just close with two things that come up a lot of times in conversations that people ask about. And one is people do ask why I decided to do it as letters, because that was, the entire thing is told in her letters to Michael Collins. And when you sit down to write a book, after you've decided what you want to write about, what your main subject is, the most important decision to me that you'll ever make is what the voice is going to be. What's the point of view? Okay. And kids in your audience may know first person is any story where it's I did this, I did that. Third person is he did that, or she did that, or Jerry did that. It's an outside narrator. Rarer still is there's a 9-book series that I created with my husband and daughter called The Sisters 8 for young readers about octuplets whose parents disappear one New Year's Eve. And the entire 9-book series is written from first person plural. So everything is we did this, we did that. It's very unusual. So point of view is important, and how you present it is important, whether it's present tense, past tense. And in this book, I decided to do letters because even though if I had written first person, I this, I that, from Amy's point of view, it would be personal. To me, the letters make it that much more personal. It's almost confessional. And in Mamie's case, she's an unusual situation. And maybe some kids in your audience, I hope everybody has happy home lives, but not everybody does. Or if you have a happy home life, it may not be happy 100% of the time. And in Mamie's situation, she is very upset about what is going on with her parents and what she sees as the beginning of the disintegration of her family. Now in the year 2020, hopefully if you are not happy at home and you're 10 years old or 12 years old, however old you are, there are people you can talk to about it. You can talk to a counselor at school or another relative, or if you're religious, a member of the clergy or at your synagogue or at your mosque or what have you, or a friend. Okay. In 1969, people were pretty private about any problems that were going on at home. And that's something that I do know from my own family home life. You didn't talk about things outside of the house that were going on inside of the house. And so Mamie starts writing these letters. And at one point in the book, her sister, Bess, the 16-year-old, when she finds out that Mamie's been writing to Michael Collins, she mocks her for it. She's like, this important astronaut, what do you think, Mamie, he's going to write back to you? She talks to Mamie like she's a little idiot. And in fact, Mamie isn't a little idiot. The reason she keeps writing to Michael Collins is that he's become like her therapist, other dad, confessional, and it's safe because she's 100% sure he's not writing back. Yeah. Do you mean? In a way, she's sending them into the void. She may not even think they're being read, but it is someone who she can talk to and share her burdens with and work things out in her head so she can feel better about her world. So it's therapy. So that is why that is the way it is. And I guess the other thing that I would want readers to take away from it is people often ask if I had a friend when I was Mamie's age who was like Buster. And I didn't, not when I was 10. But when I was 12, I had my first great best friend, and I have been lucky enough in the 45 years and counting since then to always have at least someone that brings that quality to my life. And what I love about Buster is when he says to Mamie, if it's important to you, it's important to me. Yeah. Because I think that all too often, kids their age, but even adults do this, because I hear, spouses will do this to each other. If I like something, you think it's stupid, or vice versa. Like, oh, you watch soap operas, they'll rot your brain. You play golf, that's a stupid sport. Yeah. And you know, all too often our friends like things and we mock them for it, or you still like to play with dolls, or you have a crush on so-and-so, well, he's an idiot, instead of being supportive, you know? So to me, when Buster says, if it's important to you, it's important to me, that is the message of friendship. And so I say, you know, I hope that everyone listening has the opportunity in life at some point to have a friend like Buster, but as important and maybe more important, I hope you aspire to be a friend like Buster, to be that person for other people. And unless you've got any other questions,
no,
I guess that's all I have.
That's a beautiful place to wrap it up. I think that's great. So
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your day to share with us.
It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.